Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to our third lecture for our Sustainability Lecture Series organized by the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability. This is part of our initiative to bring topics of sustainability and development closer to the Ateneo community so that everyone can participate in the discussion. We have a very special and quite interesting topic for today, and I think at this point I would like to acknowledge the president of our university, President Father Jeff, and our Vice President for Social Development, Attorney Jose Lenya. And on behalf of the Director of the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability, Dr. Kitik, I welcome you to today's lecture. So allow me to introduce our very accomplished speaker for today. She is a daughter of the Ateneo. She graduated with a degree in physics and was valedictorian of her batch. Summa cum laude, may I add? Valedictorian of her batch. After graduating, she went on to get her Master in Environmental Management also from the Ateneo, after which she went to Purdue University to earn her PhD in Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. Her research interests include human and ecosystem dynamics and systems dynamics, and she's here with us to share her thoughts on systems thinking for environment and sustainability. Please help me welcome Dr. Kendra Fernando.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking the time out to come to this talk. I hope you will enjoy it as I enjoyed making the presentation. I actually never worked so hard on a PowerPoint as I did on this one, but maybe it's just because I'm not very skilled in making PowerPoint presentations. So I thought we'd start this afternoon with 3 games. Okay, 3 games. Before that, let me acknowledge. Sorry, I'm kind of excited to go on to my games. I just like to acknowledge the people who have helped me on the road learning systems thinking. So through our Coastal Cities at Risk project of the Manila Observatory and the Ateneo de Manila University, I met Dr. Slobodan Simonovic and Angela Peck and did my first training with them. And then I'd like to acknowledge Sir Victor Mentar of JT Song, who some of you might know and are taking his systems dynamics class. And then Mary Newell Katrina Krause of Australian National University, who along with Jose Siri gave a workshop at the UN University on systems dynamics. So I'm happy to have learned from them and happy to share with you what I learned from them. Okay, now on to our games. Siguro naman when you were kids, you did a lot of this. Or is this not in your generation anymore? So I know when I was a kid, you would buy the books, right? And some of them are as simple as this. What are you supposed to do? What is this basically? It's a connect the dots. So you start at 1, then you go to 2, 3, 4, and so on. Right? Very simple. And even without connecting the dots, you kind of know what this is, right? It's a 1. It's a teddy bear. So this is a kids connect the dots exercise. FYI, if you are still interested in these kinds of things, there are adult level connect the dots exercises, which probably, if we hadn't already started some of it, you would not be able to tell what this is, right? Even now, just looking at the numbers that are left in the background, can you make out, is there a bird there? Is there a tree? I'm not quite sure. The point is, you need to make an effort for the picture to come out, right? Okay, so that's one thing we learned from playing Connect the Dots. There's a bigger picture. You just need to make the effort, right? Okay. Game number 2 in this one. I'm running ahead of myself because I'm so excited about my games. This is another Connect the Dots, okay? Which is a little less straightforward, right? Where is the number 1? Well, there's a number 1 here, but that's not where you're supposed to start. Where is the number 1? You have to follow this guide. So number 1 is the answer to x cubed equals 64. Number 2 is the answer to x to the 1/3 equals 3. Right? That is cruel. I just want to enjoy my connect the dots. Why are you making if you did this correctly. But sometimes your connect the dots looks like this. There are so many dots. You're not even sure if all of them are part of this picture. Right? Or you can draw many pictures choosing any subset of dots. So how will you know? How will you know? So there are actually instructions here. You're supposed to start at the red star and then proceed in connecting adjectives in lowercase alphabetical order. So you have to look where is the next adjective that's in lowercase and is in alphabetical order. And if you do it correctly, the picture is a verb. But if you did not have these guidelines, you would not have known where to start, and you may have come up with a completely different picture. May not necessarily have been the wrong picture, but it just would have been different. So what do we learn from this set of connect the dots games? Medyo higher level siya. Sometimes you do need guidelines, frameworks, perspectives to discern what's going on and to draw from it a coherent picture. Okay, game number 2. Maybe you'll see why I was so excited. You've heard of this. 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. That supposedly you can connect any celebrity to him by no more than 6 steps just because he has starred in so many movies. And the rules are, dapat magkasama sila sa isang movie. Okay, so TV doesn't count, movie. So Joseph Gordon-Levitt is one of the young stars that I like, and I'm challenging you. I'm challenging you to connect Kevin Bacon to him in 6 steps or less. I give you a little while to think about it. If you have any suggestions, just shout them out. What movies has Kevin Bacon starred in? Footloose, okay, we don't know anyone can Footloose that may have starred with someone, that may have starred with someone, that may have starred with someone, that may have starred with Joseph Gordon-Levitt. I did it in 3, and you can stretch it to 2. Well, you can shrink it to 2. So Footloose is 1. Does anyone else have a suggestion? Kevin Bacon. Come on, there's so many movies. Or is it just because hindi niya siya he's not your generation anymore. He starred in some recent movies. In fact, all the steps I will show you are in the last 5 years. In the last 5 years, at least I can guarantee that. Maybe in the last 2. Wala! Apollo 11. Okay, who was in Apollo 11 with Kevin Bacon? That was only Tom Hanks. Can you think of how to connect Tom Hanks to Joseph Gordon-Levitt? You have to think about it a bit, but okay. Here's one solution. So Kevin Bacon starred with Ryan Reynolds in RIPD. It wasn't very successful. I don't know if you didn't watch it, didn't hear about it. So he starred with Ryan Reynolds in RIPD. Ryan Reynolds starred with Wolverine. Starred in Wolverine. Wolverine was with Ellen Page in X-Men. And then, yes, then it becomes a bit more obvious where the connection is. Inception. Right? So you can shrink this, if you want to be smart about it, you can shrink this and say, you know, well, technically, Wolverine already came out in X-Men First Class for a brief period of time. And Kevin Bacon was the one leader in X-Men First Class, right? Did you guys not see this part where may cameo siya? No? Oh, now you have to go back to X-Men First Class and watch it again. Kevin Bacon, yes, was the, I forget what his name was, but he was the one who had tortured Eric Lencher as a kid in a concentration then may power suit pala siya. So from there, you can skip to Ellen Page and get to Inception. Right? Did you guys watch? So what do we learn from playing this game? Sometimes the connections are subtle. They're not obvious, and you really have to pause and take some time, put a bit more effort to discern where they are. But once they become obvious, suddenly, yun pala yun. The connections were more direct than we thought. So for example, would you believe that putting up streetlights can help bring down the spread of STDs? Now, I heard this from someone at the UN University for the International Institute for Global Health. So there's credibility. There's credibility to this. So putting up street lights can help in bringing down STDs in a community. The connection subtle, but it's there. And when you think about it, kasi. Any volunteers? Any volunteers? Nahihiya ba kayo because it's a bit scandalous? STDs. What happens if your community is dark at night? What happens when your community is dark at night? There are things that might happen in the dark. Whether unwillingly or through people lying their train. Yes? So when you put up these street lamps, you actually deter these activities which were a reason for the spread of STDs. Doesn't it make sense? Yes? So at first, parang ang labos na ng connection. But when you think about it and explain it to yourself, actually, it can make sense. Okay, last game, and this one is maybe a bit more technical. Just tell me what do the following have in common? Failure to carry out repairs. So you don't repair because you want to save money. If it's your car or your house, okay. You widen the roads because you want to reduce accidents. You spray ragweed. It's responsible for many allergies, the pollen of ragweed, with broad-spectrum herbicides. And introduce shrimp to feed freshwater salmon. What do these things have in common? What do they have in common? Maybe the last two are less obvious, but the first two, if you don't repair your car because you want to save money, what will happen down the road? You might get into an accident, your car might stall, kailangan nyo ipato, and then how much money do you have to shell out because those things happen? A lot more than if you just had your car repaired, right? Road widening to reduce accidents. Do we reduce accidents by widening our roads? What is the tendency of our roads widen? What do our drivers tend to do? They'll tend to go faster. They'll tend to go left, right, diba? All to take on more space. So do we reduce accidents? Maybe not. Okay, so in the first one, you don't carry out repairs to save money, but you actually end up perhaps not saving money. In the second, you widen the road to reduce accidents, but perhaps you end up not reducing accidents at all. So maybe you can guess from the other two. So with the ragweeds, what people found was that if you spray them, so you spray them with herbicides because you want to kill them, right? But they actually come back stronger and more of them grow the following year. So spraying with herbicides actually just cause them to come back better. And then the introducing shrimp to feed freshwater salmon. You can guess by the trend, it's actually the opposite that happened. was supposed to be supplemental prey for the salmon, but instead of the salmon population growing, they crashed. So, bakit? So, let's take a look at those last two. This is ragweed. It causes people with allergies, so we spray it with herbicide, but then the next year, it just comes back. Why? Would anyone like to guess why? I think the key word here is that these are broad-spectrum herbicides. What do we mean when we say broad-spectrum herbicide? Very good. Because it's broad-spectrum, it's not targeted to the ragweed. It also ends up killing plants that are competition for the ragweed, and so the ragweed is able to grow in their place. So, very good. How about the shrimp stocking and the salmon collapse? So they found that so they added the shrimp supposedly to feed the salmon, but then the salmon population collapsed, and so it also affected the eagle and the bear populations. Why did that happen? So for those who have taken ES10, and I'm assuming that a lot of you here have, is that the same assumption? Alright. Yes, majors are minors in sustainability. Okay, you might be familiar with the concept of a food web. Okay, so what is the food web here? See, this is the shrimp. They eat zooplanktons. Okay, now the salmon, this is not to scale ha. Hindi ibig sabihin na ganun kalaki yung shrimp, tapos ganyan kalaki yung zooplankton. You might be thinking, ko, paano nakakain yung shrimp yung zooplankton na ganyan kalaki? It's not to scale, okay? It's just to show you what they look like. So the shrimp, they eat zooplankton. The salmon eat the shrimp, but they also eat zooplankton. And this is what they found. So the salmon, they're more active during the day. They spend their time during the day in the upper 30 meters of the water, and then they're eating. But the shrimp is not active during the day. They spend the day in the lower depths, and it's at night when they go up and feed on zooplankton. So what happened? The shrimp was supposed to be food for the salmon, but they don't see each other. So how can the salmon eat the shrimp? Instead, the shrimp are eating the zooplankton, which is also food for the salmon. So by the next morning, nakakain na si shrimp ng zooplankton, then someone goes back and says, oh, nasa na si zooplankton ko, nabawasan. So it was supposed to be a measure to grow the salmon population, but it ended up crashing the salmon population, which affected the predators that ate the salmon, so the eagle population. So what do we learn from this? If we take the time and make the effort to establish those connections, then we might avoid these unwanted, unanticipated surprises that come with our good intentions. Right? It's a good intention. We want to grow the salmon population. It's a good intention. We want to kill the ragweed. It's a good intention. We want to widen the roads. Unfortunately, they have unanticipated adverse impacts that we could have avoided if we had made the connection at the start. So how do all of these things relate to our topic today, which is systems thinking? So what is systems thinking? In your life, I'm sure you have dealt with numerous systems. You are made of systems. Right? Tama ba? Is it correct to say you are made of systems? You have a respiratory system, a reproductive system, right? You live in an ecosystem, which is on a planetary system, which is in a solar system. Right? We are full of systems. And what are we talking about when we talk about systems? So basic components, what makes up your system? So for example, what are the parts of a bicycle? How do they fit together? What are the relationships? So these are the interactions. And what function do they perform? So what is the purpose of this system? How will we know whether it is healthy, whether it is functioning properly if you don't know what that function or what that purpose is. So systems thinking is basically the analysis of the system structure and how the behaviors of the system relate to that structure. I like to call it big picture perspective because as you'll see with our examples later on, sometimes you have to go beyond a specific field of discipline just to see the entire system. So again, for those of you who have taken ES10 and you talked about ecosystems, so you see the same definitions, the same parts laying out, right? You have your components, your abiotic and biotic factors. You have the ways in which they interact. Can you name some ways in which living organisms might interact with other living organisms? You said something? Sige lang. Oh, predation. Yes, as in the food web. Okay, so those are examples of interactions. And then we have the functions. So the ways in which they interact serve to cycle matter and energy through the ecosystem, making sure that it is fit for everyone's survival and growth. Right? So what are some tools of systems thinking? On the one level, we can already do this conceptually as we have been in the games that we were playing. Or you can go level up and do this using computer modeling. Sige, so let's start with the conceptual modeling using influence diagrams or causal loop diagrams. What is this? It's basically telling a story. If you have little brothers or sisters, so you remember them being little nieces, nephews, like if you know kids. Diba, usually makulit. They will say, we're going to go to SM. And then we're going to eat at the food court. And then we're going to go to a movie. And then, diba? Ganun pagbata. Or it could be, why is the sky blue? After you give your first answer, but why? Why? Bakit? And so you find yourself having to trace back until they get tired. Yeah. So that's basically what we're doing when we're constructing influence diagrams. We're telling a story by connecting ideas to causal relationships. And we'll have an example of that. Sige, so traffic is something close to our heart. Right? This morning, I'm sure many of you, like me, were later than you had hoped to be because of, I don't know what happened this morning actually. I came from the north and from there to Ateneo, there wasn't any traffic and there wasn't any accident. So I was wondering why the traffic was so heavy. I have no explanation. Or we will try to come up with an explanation. So let's think about the number of people taking mass transport. And I'd like you to focus on road-based transport for now. So not MRT, but rather bus systems, or let's say mga FX or jeeps. Okay. What are the things that might influence the number of people who would choose to take these road-based mass transport options? Ngayon, what leads you to decide whether you take the bus or ride your car? If you have a car. So that's one. Do I have a car? Can I afford a car? Ano ba?
Can I drive it? Can I drive it?
Is it a place that you can drive to? Okay. How about let's modify it? Let's say, is it a place that is served by bus transport? Like, does the jeep stop near my house? Or does the bus stop near my house? What else? Oh, parking. I didn't think about that, but that's a good idea. Ano pa? Okay, things like the cost of gasoline, so the cost of owning a car. What else? Pag nababasa niyo yung mga news about yung bus, nahulog sa bangin. Diba? Is that something that you consider na makabasa if I happen to ride a bus from a bus company that's less than responsible. Ano ba? Or pag merong, ay, na-hold up sa loob ng jeep. Nasangkot ang driver. At I don't know what I heard about that. Baka pag may pabila ko, bawal na ako. What else? Wala kayo ideas? Do we all just take cars to school? Sige. So these are some examples of things that would influence how many people choose to ride the road-based transport, right? Is it served by mass transport in the first place? If you take the bus and the routes are usually not direct to where you want to go, it may be a bit circuitous. How much time will it take to get to my destination? Can I just take a car? Right? Can I afford the car and the gasoline that comes with it? Okay, what's the probability that I might get held out? What's the probability I might get into an accident? So those are some things, and we named others like parking, which are good considerations. Okay, now let's look at the other side, which is what things are now affected by the number of people taking road-based mass transit. What impacts would you expect if more people took buses instead of riding their cars? Less traffic. Okay, that's the obvious one. The impact on traffic. What else? Carbon emissions. Oh, very, very good. Thank you for completing my diagram for me. So, the impacts could be the number of vehicles on the road and the demand for mass transport. Right? If you have more people riding mass transport, it creates demand. And then this number of vehicles on the road affects traffic congestion, affects emissions, which could affect air quality, which could affect the incidences of respiratory illnesses. Right? Okay. So this is already an influence diagram. We've looked at the things that cause this focus variable, and we've looked at the effects of this focus variable. Now we can take it a step further and try to connect the effects to the causes. Can we do that? Is there something on this side that looks like it might influence something on the other side? If there's more demand, then right, then there would be rationale for expanding your transport system to serve more areas. Good. What else?
People with respiratory illness want to brave the pollution on the streets. Maybe they want to take their own car.
That's another good point. If you are asthmatic, maybe you won't want to commute and you'd rather just take your own car. So that will affect the number of people taking road-based transport. I heard one more. Something to do with traffic. Yes?
Number of vehicles on the road will affect probability of fire.
Pwede din, yes.
Traffic congestion will affect time to get to the destination.
Yes, so all very good answers. Yeah. So you can actually complete this diagram by completing loops. And once you do that, you kind of erase the distinction between causes and effects, right? Because now that it's in a loop, there's no start, there's no end. And what do we call this? These are, if you can see it, the distinction between the blue and the purple in this projector is not very good, but if you can see the loops, these are what we call feedback loops, right? Then we can go a step further in telling our story by characterizing that feedback. Is it reinforcing or is it balancing? By reinforcing, we mean that your action creates an effect which affirms your original action. So the more is going to happen, or the more that you're going to want to do it. When we say balancing, your action causes an effect that makes you rethink your initial action and maybe do something in the opposite direction. Okay, that's what we call balancing. So here, the negative sign stands for balancing feedbacks, and then the positive for reinforcing. So let's just do this one example. The more people riding on taking mass transport, how will that affect the number of vehicles on the road? If there are more people taking buses, there will be more or less? Or fewer, there will be fewer vehicles on the road, right? So these two things go in opposite directions. More of one is less than the other. So it is a balancing relationship. In other books, you may find the terminology negative, but I'm being careful about that because sometimes napagkakamalan na decrease automatically means negative relationship when it's not about the direction of the change. It's about whether two variables change together or change in opposition. Okay, so if you have more people taking mass transit, there are fewer vehicles on the road, what happens to traffic? Fewer vehicles means less traffic, right? So this is an example of a positive or reinforcing feedback. So notice in the story, we said less, fewer and less, but it doesn't mean that the feedback was negative. Because they change in the same direction, we consider that positive. Okay. If you have less traffic, then the time it takes to get to your destination is shorter. Right? So again, that's a positive or reinforcing relationship. And if the time it takes to get to your destination is shorter, then would you be more inclined to ride the bus? Yes. Diba? Because you will think, it's efficient naman pala eh. I can get to where I need to go in a reasonable amount of time. So, the more people will start to want to take a bus. So, all in all, this loop is, in totality, is it reinforcing or is it balancing? We started with the assumption that more people would like to take mass transit. And we ended the story with more people wanting to take mass transit. So is it overall reinforcing or balancing? It's overall the students who are taking systems this semester. Robin or Chris. Overall, or mali. He was like, overall reinforcing. Okay. Nahiya pa kayo. So in a nutshell, that's what feedbacks are. You change by deciding on taking a course of action, you change the state of the system, and then you have to readjust your initial course of action in response to that change. Whether the readjustment is to do more of it or to do less of it, it depends on the feedback loop. And feedback loops are an important part of systems thinking because those are the reasons for stubborn behaviors. Right? Feedback loops are the reasons for stubborn behaviors, things that just won't go away unless you can identify the root cause that keeps on making it happen. Okay. We'll have more examples. So these are examples of reinforcing feedbacks. If you do take up systems thinking, these are some of the symbols you might come across in books. Can you understand what this is? Yeah, it's a snowball. So snowball effect. Supposedly, if you roll it down the hill, it will just gather more snow. Okay. So between birds and population, the more birds there are in a year, the bigger your population gets. The bigger your population, the more birds are in a year, and so on. So they reinforce each other. Money and interest. You put money in the bank. Your principal earns interest. So the interest next year will be higher. Okay, so that's a simple reinforcing feedback. In the environment, where do we see this? So have you heard about the ice albedo feedback? No? Maybe Father Jen can explain. The ice albedo feedback. And why are we so concerned about melting ice? So what if it melts? These are one of the runaway for example, it gets warmer. Okay, so you have more ice melting, right? Then you will have less area covered in ice. So what if there's less area? Ice happens to have very high surface reflectivity. Okay, that's what we mean by albedo. The amount of incoming radiation that it can reflect. Because it's white, it is right, it reflects almost close to 100%. So we put the albedo at 0.9. So if there's less ice, then less of that incoming radiation is reflected and more of it is absorbed. When that happens, it just becomes warmer. Okay? And when it becomes warmer, then more ice will melt, then less radiation will be reflected, then it will become warmer, then more ice will melt, and it is your never end, the song that never ends. Okay? That's a real example of a reinforcing feedback in nature. Now let's look at our balancing feedbacks. Balancing or counteracting. Resource consumption. If there's a lot of it, we tend to want to consume more, right? If you go to the buffet and then you see, oh, there's ang dami-daming baked oysters. Minsan lang ako makakain yan. Then you fill it out, you fill up your plate, right? If everyone thought like you, then what will happen to the baked oysters? Maya-maya. Wala na, di ba? Di ba? So with resource consumption, there's a lot of it. We tend to want to use more of it. Then when we realize that it's dwindling, what happens to our consumption patterns? If we're responsible, we have to adjust. We have to consume less because otherwise we would run out. So that's an example of a balancing feedback. In natural resource management, we have this very common system dynamics model called the fish banks model, and it basically connects the fish ecosystem with the fishery industry. So there's a lot of fish to be found in our coastal waters. Each ship catches enough to make profit. Enough profit to build more ships. And as they build more ships, they catch more fish. But as they catch more fish, what happens to the fish population? It drops. And pretty soon, the catch per ship will also drop. They won't make enough profit to continue with their shipbuilding, and they may actually have to end up selling ships just to stay in business. So that is a common example of the balancing feedback. And you can apply it to almost any resource that you can think of. So in nature, in environment, in communities, in systems, we will see a combination of these feedbacks. Okay? So the population system is not just births that we are concerned about, right? It's also deaths. So on the one side, you have a positive reinforcing feedback, but on the other side, you have your negative counteracting balancing feedback. This is a figure of carbon stocks, and there are both positive and negative feedbacks as well. Like for example, the more CO2 there is in the atmosphere, the higher your average temperature, the faster the decomposition rate of soil carbon, which actually releases more carbon into the atmosphere. So that's reinforcing. Or we can trace this route. The more CO2 there is in the atmosphere, it actually improves to a certain degree, okay, the uptake of the carbon sequestration. It's called the carbon fertilization effect. The trees become just a little bit more efficient, but there is a limit to that. But let's say it is within that level, okay, that means more carbon CO2 is removed by biomass, and then you have less CO2 in the atmosphere. So we are dependent on, a balance of these feedback loops. So let's move into the next step, which is if we are able to translate these conceptual models into computer models. into stocks and flows. So your typical system dynamic software, examples would be Pentium or Stella, if you're interested in looking them up. These are your basic elements. You identify which are stocks. These are things that accumulate in time. There are flows. These are rates. These describe how things change in time. And they can either add to or take away from your stocks. And then there's extra information that you need to compute for these things. So very simple example of how this translates into a computer model. In this figure, you have your oil reserves. Oil reserves is a stock, right? Consumption is a flow. It decreases the oil reserves. Your consumption rate is information. So here, translated into a computer model, your oil reserves is a stock. The consumption takes away from that stock at a given rate. Then you run this in your software and then you come up with a nice graph that will show you the trend over time or the behavior of the system over time. And this is a very simple system and it shows you one of your basic curves, which is, what is this? A curve. What does it look like? Lang sa back, hindi ba yung mga Planck's decay? Okay, thank you. Thank you. If you did this with population, then you would see the opposite type of graph, which is population inverse. It would be exponential growth. Okay. So we're doing this now with population, with the fish population, but aside from just births, we factored in the deaths. And we factored in an important notion in environment and sustainability, carrying capacity. What is carrying capacity? What is carrying capacity? A carrying capacity is 5 kilos because that's all I can manage to hold in my arms. Yung ba yun? What is carrying capacity? Do you remember from ES10? Yes. It is an upper bound to what? To the, sige na. It is an upper bound to the functionality of your ecosystem. Okay. Ay, what? Did I get it wrong? Sorry? In relation to mathematical definition. Okay, I'm sorry. But let's take off from there. Upper bound. Upper bound, bakit? Why is there a limit? It's a limit. So tama yun. It's a limit. Why is there a limit? Because your ecosystem has finite resources. Okay, so your carrying capacity describes the number of species that your ecosystem can accommodate given its finite resources. So it's not just about the space, it's also about what? It's not just about the space, or how many species can fit into a space like this. It's also about whether there's food, whether there's water, whether there's a source of energy, right? It's all those things. So here, we've incorporated a carrying capacity, which basically says the more they overstep the carrying capacity, the more fish will die, right? And we end up with your S-shaped curve. Because this is the part where they're growing exponentially, but then they're coming near the carrying capacity and more of them start dying out until they reach letter E. Equilibrium. Okay, thank you. So that S-shaped curve is actually one of the most basic system archetypes. Okay. Archetypes, what we mean by this is it's amazing to think, but given the diversity of systems that you can find in nature and in communities, there are similar structures that yield similar behaviors, and these are some of those basic behaviors. Your exponential growth or decay. So you will tend to have exponential growth if your limit is far off, or if your limit is also increasing. You will tend to have your S-shaped curve if you have a fixed limit. And we are able to respond to that limit. But the danger is, what if you don't know where the limit is and you don't know if you've reached it? There's a delay in realizing that, oops, we fished too much. We've cut down too many trees. We've bought too many cars. We burn too many fossil fuels. What if there's a delay in realizing that we have not just hit but overstepped that limit? That's what the lower two graphs represent. If we're lucky, we realize we've overstepped the limit, we'll crash for a little while, but somehow we'll try to reestablish that equilibrium. If we're not lucky, if we've overstepped it too much, we crash it and we stay crashed. Right? And that's the importance of delay in systems. Whether you get the message soon enough to change your course of action. Dito pa nga, this last one, you will see, so the dashed line is the line for the limits. And you will see that the limits are also going down. They're also decreasing. What does that mean? For those who have taken ES10 or Science 10, you may have done the module on footprints, ecological footprints, biocapacity. Yes? No? Sino dito ang excited? Nagsa-excited kayo? Your prof is here. So, if you had gone through that module on footprints, di ba we compare our footprint to the biocapacity. And in that module, we usually say that, our current footprint is, if we proceed on our current footprint, we'll need 2.5 Earths. Right? So, the biocapacity is actually something that's not constant. We can degrade biocapacity. We can degrade biocapacity through improper, insufficient environmental management. For example, soil. The more intense you till a soil, the less productive it becomes. Right? So the capacity of the soil to support crops actually degrades. So you can degrade biocapacity. And so we may already be over the limit without realizing that we are so far over the limit because we have eroded that biocapacity. Which brings us to the concept of resilience. Okay. And this is a keyword, popular word when it comes to disasters and climate. We want to be disaster resilient, climate resilient. So what does it mean? Meadows, if you'd like to look her up, Donella Meadows, she's one of the pioneers of systems thinking and part of the Limits to Growth initiative. And this is how she describes it in the context of systems. So it's the measure of the system's abilities to survive and persist despite changes in the environment. Because there are structures at work, feedback loops at work that help us to restore balance even when we encounter a large disturbance. So if we're going to visualize this in plots, on the y-axis, think of any variable that might be of importance to you. Maybe your income, your health, water reservoirs, right? Happiness. Okay, sige, happiness. Let's run with that, happiness. Think of your happiness. Then a hazard comes along, right, and disturbs your happiness. What could do that? What could disturb your happiness? Somebody broke up with you, let's say. Let's say you have a girlfriend, your boyfriend, he broke up with you. Perturbation in my world. Your happiness drops. How do you know if you are resilient? So, we can look at two things. How far down you drop. Like, you get to the point of just being a couch potato for the whole week, gorging on ice cream and potato chips. Do you fall that far down? Or are you able to least come to school the next day, right? And get through all your classes. Or the other aspect we can look at is how fast do you recover? And can you actually bounce back better? Get to a better state than before you were broken up with, right? Which is what we're supposed to do, right? When we go through these emotional upheavals, it's supposed to make us stronger people. Okay. So the resilience in the system, we can see it, if we were to model it, we can see it in how far down your variable of concern drops and how fast it can come back up again, and if it can even improve from its baseline value. So I'm actually part of a project that's trying to do this for flooding. Trying to think of the systems that affect how resilient we are to flooding. When a big flood hits, how does it affect households in terms of their loss of assets? What are the things that can help them build back that asset base? Okay, same for LGUs. What are the things that help the LGUs try to recover from their losses? Okay, so this can actually be adapted for many things. Here's an example, an ecological application. Let's consider a hypothetical species. Name something that you like, a species that you like. Pikachu? Again, that's a show, hypothetical species, that's a show of Pikachu. Pikachu species. Let's say that they are living, quite nicely in their community. They give birth, they die, they have a natural predator, but after 10 years of living in that habitat, some ecological capacity wipes out 75% of the Pikachu population, and we lose 50% of its habitat. So let's say there was a big fire, and we've lost 50% of the habitat and 75% of the population died. So this is something that we can model in a system dynamic software and see, are they resilient? Are they able to re-establish equilibrium? So here, these are the first 10 years before the catastrophe hits. So their population is nice and growing. Then we have the catastrophe, which wipes out 75% of our species and 50% of the habitat. What do you notice moving forward? Do they re-establish equilibrium? Yeah, they do, right? But the question is it as high as it would have been without the catastrophe? No. And what is the variable which caused your equilibrium population to drop significantly? The fact that because of the catastrophe, we lost 50% of the habitat. If that was not part of this scenario, this species would just recover up to previous levels. But because we lost part of that habitat, we've effectively lowered the limit, right? We've lowered the biocapacity for accommodating this species. They do re-establish, but it's at a very much lower equilibrium. So, this is systems thinking. It's fun work. You can think of it like playing games, connecting the dots, but it also comes with challenges. So as you may have already seen from the games, the components may be many. There are so many dots. You have to figure out where to start, and you have a guiding framework. The connections may be subtle. How are feedbacks connected to health issues? And because we're looking at feedback loops, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. Okay, where do we start? Because you've lost the distinction between what is a cause and what is effect. What is an effect? So for example, green spaces in the city. The area or the extent of green spaces in the city. What is the cause and what is the effect? Is it that people in QC like outdoor living like to have many physical activities in parks and value green spaces. So the government will put up more parks? Or do we put up the parks first? If you build it, they will come. We put up the parks first, and maybe people will start to try outdoor activities and maybe they'll like it, and then we can have more parks. So do you wait for the demand to come, right, to cause you to build the parks, or do you build the parks and create the demand? This is, if any of you had gone to Dr. Barbaza's talk a few weeks ago, and he showed this is the bicycle skyway in Copenhagen. If it's not clear from the picture, there's a river, and so they built the bicycle bridge over the river. Can you imagine spending so much money building a skyway for bikes? Not for cars, but for bikes. How does the government decide to put that much investment? So it's the same as this question. Is it because there are many citizens who take their bikes to work and would like to benefit from such a skyway, there's a demand, so they'll build it? Or they want to create the demand and encourage more to cycle, so they'll build it and hope that people will use it. Okay, so sometimes it's hard to know where do we start. Feedbacks may also be complex. This is an influence diagram. And in this one influence diagram, you'll find a climate system, the public health and well-being system, and the urban planning system. Let's say that you are an environmental manager and what you want to do is to address ground level ozone concentration. How will you do it? Based on this diagram, do you trace back, oh, it has something to do with the transport, oh, it has something to do with community well-being, oh, at some point you realize you can't do everything by yourself because the feedbacks are so complex. You will need to bring in people from other disciplines. But there may be more than one valid model. So in the picture with all the dots, and if you followed one set of instructions, you will get a bird. What if you followed another set of instructions and you got a heart or a star? Does it make you wrong? Is the picture wrong? So different stakeholders can have different perspectives. And even your perspective may change over time. So when you're building these conceptual models, if I ask two people to do it, okay, build me a model that shows me the impact of the Mount Pinatubo eruption, you would not come up with the same model. And actually, that Mount Pinatubo eruption is a personal realization for me. You guys are probably not born yet when that happened. Right? When were you born? 91 is the eruption. So, no? No? Okay. For me, if you ask me what the impact of this event was, I would remember the ash on, waking up with ash on our car and our front lawn. I would remember all the problems we want to do with all the Dahar. What do we do about the people who were displaced from their homes? That is what Mount Pinatubo eruption meant to me. When I went to the States, and the people, the scientists there were talking about Mount Pinatubo eruption, for them, what it meant to them was, oh, that event, it lowered global temperatures 2 years after the eruption. Oh, this has something, we can use this study to look at geoengineering. Right? It's the same event, but we have two different perceptions of what it meant. And you can't say that any one person is wrong. Diba? More recent examples. Yeah, traffic. MRT, the state of the MRT. You see people blaming whoever. We should sue MRTC, Pinoy is saying, I did the caption it dates from Arroyo's time. And it's hard to say, they may all be partially right. Or what happened in Yolanda about the storm surge. So Pag-asa said that, yes, they gave the warning about the storm surge. But then the citizens on the ground will say, no, we didn't get sufficient warning about the storm surge. Is it easy to say, oh, Pag-asa was wrong or the people on the ground was wrong? Were wrong? Hindi. They were actually both partially right. Pag-asa did give the warning. Unfortunately what? Does anyone know what the issue there was? They didn't give the warning that there would be a storm surge, 5 to 7 meters.
One of the problems was that the locals did not necessarily understand what a storm surge meant, and that they didn't see it as big as a threat, as opposed to when people started saying it's a tsunami.
Yes, so there was a gap there. Right? So neither side was really right or really wrong. Right? So, okay, I'll get to that later. And then for people who do quantitative modeling, this is a common thing. Do we have the data? Is it easy to... Do we have the data? Is it easy to come by? And there may be variables in the diagrams that are important, but very hard to quantify, such as, this is a snapshot, because it's a big model, so this is a slice of a model that's trying to show the factors that affect people's decisions to evacuate, the decision to evacuate. And you'll see that there are mental factors influenced by social factors and physical factors. Some of this we can get data for it, right, to measure them. The rate, number of children, age. These are things that you can have concrete, measurable data for. But what about things like flood experience, awareness of risk, concern? How do you measure that? How do you measure that? So these are things we call soft variables. They're not measured in any physical way, in the same way that you might measure volume of rain or number of kids. But we can try to quantify them, to attach a scale to them. So in this particular study, this is how they quantify concern through some data fitting. It's a weight times a factor. So you also might ask, but how do they quantify knowledge of flood, previous experience, awareness of risk? So all of this was done through field work with the community. So given all of these challenges, why then do we even bother to do this big picture type of analysis, right? When we can just, I mean, doesn't it sound more tractable just to break things into their component parts, then you study each part and you study it really well, like to the depths of it, to the tiniest atom, you know this part. Why not? Isn't that more tractable? Well, have you heard of the story of the blind man and the elephant? No? Oh my God, no? This is such a common parable. Or again, this is a generation gap. Oh my God. So the story goes, there were, supposedly it was 5 men, but in the picture there are 6. Okay, but these 5 blind men who don't know what an elephant is, they come upon it and they try to guess what is an elephant. But all they can do is feel the elephant. One of them feels the tail and says, oh, it's like a rope. One of them feels the legs and says it's like a trunk. One of them feels the side of the elephant, it's like a wall. Okay. One of them, what did I say? The trunk? One of them feels the trunk and says it's like a snake. Yeah. So, and then another feels the ears and says that it's like a fan. And we know that an elephant is not a snake or a rope or a wall or a fan, right? But we can say that these men were wrong in their descriptions. It's just that they only saw parts. They only saw parts of the elephant and not the whole thing. So again, from your ES10, you might remember this principle of emergent properties. Principle of emergent properties. Volunteers? Anyone? Take it na lang from the context clues. Context clues. So this is seeing the forest instead of your individual trees. It means that when you put these components together, you get behaviors, you get properties, you get factors, you get things that you would not expect or experience if you only saw these things in their individual sense. Okay, so the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Studying one tree is not the same as studying a whole forest. Why? What do you see in a collection of trees that you don't see with just one? Specifically, what do you see in a collection of trees that you wouldn't see with just one? Horses. Parang, if you want to play fencing, isa ka lang, pwede ba? Diba? Sorry, I used to fence and that was one of my practice or medyo malinaw pala. What do you see with 2, 3, 4, 5 Gs that you may not see with one? Interactions such as virus species. Okay, so you might see competition, right? That you don't see with just one tree. That you don't experience kapag hindi ka imo ka, hindi ka iha. Diba? Or even with a molecule of water. Right? 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen molecule do not have the same properties at all as 1 H2O. Right? The other one, they don't even link with that room temperature. So it is by seeing the system and all its divergent properties that we are able to do other things. So one, to understand behaviors and trends. So going back to the fish banks example, if you were the person trying to put up a business, okay, in fishery, you might want to run the model and then you'll see, oh no, 10 years into my business, I'm seeing my number of ships decreasing and my resource base decreasing. What's happening? Okay. So if you know how the parts of the system interact, you will be able to understand what's happening. To develop out of the box or co-benefit solutions, if I ask you, how do we address obesity? The extent of obesity. What solutions might you give? You want to address obesity? Ano yung obvious? What are the things that we might do to address weight problems? Being overweight, ano? Diet, okay, ano pa? Exercise, ano pa? Diba say, education, right? Would you believe me if I said that we can solve it through addressing traffic problems? Ano naman ang connection nito? So this is an influence diagram, a causative diagram that was published in the New South Wales Bureau of Health, actually connecting time spent commuting to the extent of their obesity problem. Right? Because the longer you spend in traffic, the less time you have to exercise. And that's my excuse to myself every night. I'm just so tired. The longer you spend in traffic, the higher your level of stress, and the more that maybe you would want to eat or overeat. The more time you spend in traffic, the less time you have to cook a good meal at home instead of just buying fast food. Right? So would you expect that something that could help with a health-related problem is actually found outside of the health sector? To avoid fixes that fail, epic fail. Like the example of the ragweed and the shrimp earlier, these were fixes that did not work out the way that they were intended. And we can see a lot of this type of issue in current events. So this came out a few months ago. So water was being extracted from Cavite rivers to supply Tagaytay because of the growing demand in Tagaytay. So that's a fix. We want to fix the water supply to Tagaytay. but is there potential for that fix to fail? Because it might actually divert from other localities. Right? So according to MWRD, hindi naman daw, it won't adversely affect the water supply of these other localities, but I haven't read the report, so I cannot say yes or no. But it's something to consider. And if you have a systems perspective, that is something that you would consider in your decision making. Because the intended outcomes may or may not occur, but the unintended outcomes always occur. Parang Murphy's law, in a sense. And then to identify efficient, effective intervention points. That hopefully, if you had at least a good causal loop diagram, you would be able to see where you could make a big impact instead of just addressing symptoms. It's a bit dark, but can you see? This is Mickey Mouse in the Sorcerer's Apprentice. You're familiar with this in Fantasia? Again, this is a generation gap. Yung naunang Fantasia, hindi yung remake. No, okay. In this clip, so he's the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and he was tasked to clean the house, the lab. The sorcerer leaves him, and then he's so tamad. Okay, instead of doing it himself, he enchants the brooms. He enchants the brooms and the mops to clean the place. Without him, and he goes to sleep. And when he wakes up, the brooms have gone into overdrive. They keep on bringing in buckets of water. Okay, and this is him trying to fix the problem by himself taking a bucket of water and throwing the water out, which is very ineffective because not only is he just treating the symptom of his problem, his effort is much smaller in scale than what his enchanted brooms are doing. And you might say to me, well, that's a cartoon, but we have many examples of this in real life. Just look at our flooding. No matter how many flood pumps you put there, time and time again, it's going to flood white. We haven't gotten to the underlying causal factors. Okay. So in the end, you may be wondering, parang kailangan daanan if I want to make a computer model. But you know, in the end, even if you just stay at the level of conceptual modeling, that already has a lot of value. If you can get different stakeholders in a room just to talk about how do you see the system, how do you understand the system, okay, how do you see things relating to each other. So just to get them talking to each other, to share their different perspectives, that's already going a long way in environmental management. Because you are looking at an issue from all the angles. So sometimes it's not so much the diagram, because your diagrams can change as understanding changes all the time. But it's the dialogue that you can foster just by bringing people together to talk about how they understand the system. Okay. And with that, I thank you for your